Welcome back to the Automation Podcast, the world's number one industrial automation product and technology show. Thanks to you, our audience of highly skilled automation professionals. Thank you for being a member of our audience, and thank you for tuning back in this week. Now, for those new to the show, my name is Shawn of Insights in Automation, and each week I invite a new vendor on the show to tell us about their product and technologies. And during the presentation, I play the role of the audience, asking any questions I have and questions I think you might have as well. And given that over a quarter of our audience listens to the show, I'll also try to call out any details and the visuals that I think you guys will find interesting. With that said, I want to welcome back Luis to the show. He's been on several times. You guys are probably very familiar with him. He's with Siemens, and I'm going to ask him, in case this is the first time somebody's watching the show or listening to the show, Luis, could you please introduce yourself to our audience before we jump into the S7-1200 Generation 2?
Thank you, Shawn. Good to be back on the podcast. It's been a long time since I've been on here, but for those of you who I haven't met before or who haven't met me, I'm Luis Narvaez. I'm the product manager for Somatic PLCs based out of the United States, and I'm here to share some details about the newly announced Somatic S7-1200 G2.
And I appreciate you coming on because I found those technical slides that Raj had posted, and I quickly did a live stream because I was so excited about a new PLC. I mean, new PLCs are always, for a technical guy like me, that we're always like excited about these things. So thank you for coming on. And this is where if I made any mistakes during my live stream, you'll be able to clean that up for me. So back to you, Luis.
No, it's perfect. And I talked to you offline before this, and I thought it was very good timing because we had just announced a 7-1200 G2 about 2 weeks ago now from here, and about a week before Hanover Fair, and then at Hanover Messe, it was actually showcased, and next week I'll be showcasing this at the Automation Show, at the Automate Show in Chicago. So for your audience who might be attending, they can get a preview there, or if this is going to be aired after the show, you can always set up some meetings to do a little bit more presentation or show and tell at their sites or remotely if we need to as well. So I'll go ahead and get started if you don't mind. I mean, you've seen all these slides already, so I'd love to get your questions in, and feel free to stop me at any point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just want to say for the audience, I will probably release this directly immediately for the memberships, anybody who's part of our membership programs. And then it will release probably in 2 weeks after this recording, just in the regular schedule of things. So back to you, Luis.
Perfect. All right. So here I've got the technical slides for the S7-1200 G2. Now, as I mentioned, it was just announced like 2 weeks ago about this product. I've obviously known about this for a little bit longer, but didn't want to spoil the news for our Hanover attendees and such. And I'm excited because this is the first, let's say, major hardware PLC release in almost a decade for Siemens. And of course, with new product releases, it's always exciting. And me being the PLC guy, it's exciting for me as well. So one question, I guess, to get right off the bat is why? Why release a new product? Why release a new S7-1200 G2 when the S7-1200 is very good in its own right today? And, what do we know as far as the life cycle of a typical PLC generation, right? PLCs are usually out for 2 or 3 decades before, you start to hear about the successor or the next generation of it. So very interesting timing, but really it comes down to the demands have changed. The demands for the equipment that customers are building, that machine builders are building with PLCs, their demands have changed. Their customers are asking for higher performance, more flexibility, lower costs, right? All of this is a challenge for machine builders, and so we have to come up as vendors, have to come up with solutions that meet those demands to help our customers and help their customers succeed and further down that kind of a value chain. And really, that's really what it comes down to, is how do we provide a product that can increase productivity, increase the performance of machinery, allow them to have more flexible configurations, and meanwhile still kind of optimizing the cost. And so really, and at the Automate show, this is kind of our central theme, is to expect more from your automation. With the S7-1200 G2, we're basically raising that bar for basic automation, right? The S7-1200's been known for basic machines, simple machines with um, simple automation tasks. And even though the S7-1200 has a lot of, let's say, advanced features that maybe even in the most basic PLCs today, you have to pay a premium for, it still did not meet the expectations of, let's say, our S7-1500 line of controllers. And so with the S7-1200 G2, we're kind of closing that gap a little bit between the 1200 and the 1500, so that way we can still kind of offer that performance to price advantage. And one of the biggest things is, from the safety side, better accessibility, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Expansion size and scalability there. When it comes to the performance and connectivity piece, how do we the S7-1200 G2 offers a lot more performance compared to the S7-1200 today, and natively because of that also offering a lot more connectivity options for future ready applications. And then on the scalability piece, being able to scale into higher end PLCs or even scale down from higher end PLCs in the case where, let's say you're a machine builder and you've got, you offer a machine that's got all the bells and whistles, but you often run into situations where customers don't want all the bells and whistles, and the functionality break between the costs is a big sacrifice for machine builders. Well, we don't want that to be a barrier for our machine builders. We want them to be able to scale down for simpler machines, so that way they can offer customers with tighter budgets the same performance at a reasonable cost. And then, the 1200 today offers some motion capability. We call it basic motion control. So when we're talking about like position axes or a speed axis, so think about like a conveyor or point A to point B for a single axis. The 1200 does a really good job with that. Well, the 1200 G2 extends that capability to now allow for coordinated motion or even simple kinematics. So you can configure maybe some kinematics like a gantry system or a picking roll picker or something, So the 1200 G2 will now introduce a lot of those, what we could consider advanced motion functions. The other thing is space saving. How do we offer more with less, meaning in a smaller package? So the 1200 G2 does save some space. Again, I talked about the scalability piece, the performance increase, the ability to integrate it into multiple systems much easier, the extension of communication on the CPU. So you'll see that there's 2 Ethernet ports in every model, whereas the 1200 today, only certain models have dual Ethernet ports. So just some simple usability features that go a long way for many different applications.
Louis, can I ask a question? We're looking at a CPU here with one expansion I/O module, and it looks like it has a different means of interconnecting. The originals had this slider on the front, if I remember correctly. I got a few here in the office, but how do these connect? I don't see any type of slider.
I'll get into that in a second. So basically,
Okay.
they're fixed, and I'll explain how we came to that decision.
Okay. Good.
So yeah, I mean, you pointed out one of the main appearance design features or changes, I guess, with the G2 was how they interconnect. On top of, I mentioned about 25% space reduction with the 1200 G2 compared to the G1 on the DIN rail. And then Um, we've had safety integrated with the 1200 today. However, if you wanted to hardwire safety signals into the PLC, you always required some safety I/O. With the 1200 G2, you can now add safety I/O through the option boards on the front, option slots. So you can still have safety without adding additional DIN rail space, which again, for those simple machines where maybe you've got one or two safety signals and you don't need a 8 or 16 channel safety input card or output card, that's a really nice space and cost saving measure. And you can still get that advanced features of a safety PLC versus like a safety relay type
Wait a
situation.
minute. Are you saying every S7-1200 G2 is a fail-safe PLC?
No. To be clear,
Okay.
it'll be just like the 1200 today, where you'll have a standard and a fail-safe version. But for the fail-safe versions, you can expand not only with the fail-safe I/O on the local I/O bus, or you can also expand with Profinet, which you could do with the 1200 today, Profi-safe over safety over Profinet. But the biggest change is being able to add safety I/O directly onto the option boards on the front of the CPU.
So this leads to my other question. So if you didn't have two safety option boards plugged into that fail-safe S7-1200 G2, how would I know it's like where would the yellow be? Because I'm not seeing yellow anywhere else on the brick itself, the CPU itself.
Yeah, and that's something else we changed as well with the fail-safe 1200s today. You had a very kind of hidden yellow stripe on the edges.
Yes.
With the G2, the standards and the fail-safe look the same. The difference is you'll see an FC in the model name. So,
okay.
Like, let's see if this is a close-up. Down here where you see CPU 1214C, this is a standard. If it was a fail-safe, you'll see a CPU 1214FC, as in fail-safe compact.
Yeah, that's important to know because I think a lot of people are going to think they got the wrong model because it's not going to have that little bit of yellow on it like the old models. So that's important to know.
Yep. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about the safety and options there too, because I do, I'm always a big fan of safety PLCs, especially if you're a machine builder. Safety is pretty much non-negotiable these days. Almost every end user, if not every end user today, now requires some level of safety, and maybe not legislatively, but at least from a liability standpoint, and it's the right thing to do. Let's design systems that are safe to use and protect our workers. And the cost between not doing a safety controller and a safety controller is not as much today as it used to be, 20 years ago, right? And so the cost of entry into a safety PLC, I don't think is as high of a barrier anymore. And now with this option board option, it lowers that barrier even more. So I think I would imagine that you're going to see a lot more machine builders just going with the fail-safe CPU regardless. It's there, and you have that flexibility to expand on the safety side, local I/O on the bus, local I/O through the expansion board, or even through Profinet, right? Adding some additional safety I/O over Profinet. And we've even seen some things on the roadmap for safety over like OPC UA. That's something that OPC Foundation is working on. So you might even see something like that in our controllers moving forward as that gets developed more and more.
Now, in one of the pictures I saw, it looked like these option boards stood off of the processor. But now that I'm looking at this picture again, it looks like the terminal block for these add-on boards are actually underneath the cover with the rest of the terminal blocks. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. It's flush with the CPU.
Yeah.
The terminal blocks are underneath the cover, so it's a little bit different in how you mount it compared to the Gen 1, but it's not really a huge setback, let's say. And basically, you have to remove these. You have to remove these flaps in order to slide the option board in. So. But that's not, again, it's
Oh, I
not a
see what you're
huge,
saying.
yeah, they just slide in and out. So,
Yeah.
and they're much more compact. If you remember with the 1200 G1s, they were
Mhm.
kind of square and they plug into the front and they took up a lot of space.
They did.
With these kind of being like a slide in form factor,
Mhm.
we're now able, with the 1214, have two option boards. So the
Which
1212
is
has
cool.
one option board, and now we have two option boards with the 1214 models. So, all right. Without giving up too much, just on this fifth slide, we're geeking out here, man. I love it.
Yep. Yep.
On the connectivity side, we've expanded. Like I said, with the 1200, let's say Gen 1 today, we can do up to 16 Profinet devices. With the G2, up to 31 Profinet
Nice.
remote I/O drops. Which, to be honest, I've never seen anybody use a 1200 and max out on all 16.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it's there nonetheless. And now we've basically doubled that. And then now we support Profinet IRT. So that's especially used for like isochronous real time, especially used for like those high speed motion applications that we talked about earlier, which is the next major point, is the advanced motion control that's built in. And then the other thing, which, is I think a lot of people were very surprised about when we announced this, was this NFC functionality. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. All right. So again, some quick overview. The CPU for the 1212, about 22% smaller than the 1212 today CPU on the DIN rail. And then for the 1214C, about 27 to 38%, depending if you're using the option boards, space per IO point. But the CPU module itself, about 27% narrower. The IO modules are also narrower than the 1200s today. So again, higher performance in a smaller footprint. We talked about the safety side, having the fail-safe option boards as well as the fail-safe IO cards. That's a nice little enhancement. When we talk about the motion control, we've kind of had some single-axis control. We've had single-axis control functions in the 1200 to do, limited to 1200 G1, limited to just basic motion control, so basic positioning and basic speed axis. Now we can do multi-axis simultaneously, synchronous axes. We can even configure some kinematics as well.
Let me ask you about that. So now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the G1, your motion was really PWM, pulse train stuff, right? Am I wrong about that?
No, you can do motion over Profinet with the 1200.
Okay, I didn't know
Um,
that. I didn't know that. But a single axis, is that what was the limit? Do you remember? I hate to put you on the
it's
spot.
8 axes for the 1200 today, the 1200 Gen
Okay.
1, but it's 8, let's say, position axes or 8 speed
Yeah.
axes.
Not
Um,
coordinated.
Not coordinated, right? So they're all individual from each other, and it doesn't have IRT. So a lot of times with the positioning axis,
Hmm.
depending on what kind of, let's say, position cycle time you need, maybe it wasn't accurate enough. If maybe you needed something high speed, because it
High
doesn't have
speed and
the real
synchronized.
time. Yeah, because it doesn't have that real time communication, you're kind of it's not as deterministic as to when the actions are going to happen that you want to happen. So whereas now with IRT and some of these advanced motion control functions, you can do things like flying discs or flying shears or
Hmm. Hmm.
coordinated motion and multiple axis circular interpolation type things,
Now, I don't want to ask anything that might get you in trouble, but I got to
hmm
ask anyways. Is there anything being added to the G2 that I can't do with a standard 1500? Not a technology, not a just a standard one. Because I'm seeing all these technology objects, and I'm automatically drawn to
So
the higher end 1500.
exactly, yeah. So basically, it's going to have the same motion control capabilities as our 1500T technology
Okay.
CPUs. So you could, in a way, say that there are some motion functionalities in the 1200 that won't be available in the standard 1500.
That's what I was thinking.
but only available in the 1500T technology.
That puts a little pressure on the 1500 guys, I got to imagine.
Um, not entirely. I mean, you got to think the technology CPUs are specifically designed for motion applications.
Hmm.
So in 90% of those applications where you're putting an S7-1500 PLC in there, you're going to use a technology CPU. Not that the 1500 can't do motion, but it doesn't have as, the synchronous axes and cross synchronous distribution and all kinds of kinematic functions that the T has.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but the 1500 can be used in, let's say, the standard 1500, the non-technology, can be used in other applications where maybe you don't need the advanced motion control. Things like, just conveyor systems or even factory automation type applications. So if it's not, or even equipment that machinery that doesn't have motion, the 1200 G2 is mostly designed for machine builders and for machine builders that have a wide range of capabilities that they need to support. And so rather than having, many families of 1200, then a 1200T, and then TF
Yeah,
and
yeah.
standard T, it's just so much easier, especially when the focus is basic automation, to keep the portfolio even more simpler. So with that, we've also reduced the models, right? Down from, we had 1211, 1212, 1214, 1215,
Hmm.
1217. With the G2, we're starting off with just a 1212 and a 1214. And the focus here is that you should be able to meet all the requirements that you had with a 1211, 1215, and 1217s between these two model numbers in the G2.
Does the EM
We
stand for expansion module?
Yeah, expansion modules. So those are the signal modules that are going to go to the right of the CPU.
Hmm.
And the reason why it's expansion module now instead of SM for signal module
Hmm.
is because the difference now is everything is to the right of the CPU. If you recall
Oh,
from when you and I did the first 1200 overview podcast,
yeah.
the communication modules were always on the left and all the
Hmm.
IO modules were to the right of the CPU. With the Gen 2, everything spans to the right. So the
Oh,
communication cards go first and then all your IO, which is, I mean, this is pretty traditional for most PLC systems these days anyways, where you've got your PLC, you've got your comms, and then all your expansion IO to the, adjacent to it to the right. So we're kind of bringing the 1200 back to that traditional feel.
but that's
So
important because if you're using the 1200, you didn't have to take up an IO slot to add a COM card. So that's
right.
important for people to know. Yeah.
Right. So with the 1212 before, your limit was 2 IO modules to the right
Hmm.
and up to 3 comms card to the left. So in total,
Hmm.
you had 5, right? So we've
Yeah.
increased that quantity to 6. And then the 1214, you had up to 8 IO modules. And so we've increased that to 10. Um,
Oh, okay.
right.
So you're
So
not really losing anything, and almost nobody has three communication modules. So you're actually gaining here.
yeah, it's kind of a net gain. And then the memory structure is aligned like our S7-1500, where the 1200 today, you've got kind of your program and data all in one, let's say memory spec. It's just called work memory. Whereas with the 1500s, it's kind of split. Your work memory is split into data and program memory. While the 1200 G2 is now like the 1500, where it's split in program and data memory. And this helps a little bit better with when it comes to sizing and that scalability piece that I talked about, moving from a 1200 to a 1500.
But it's
Um,
still all internal if you want it to be. You don't have to add the memory card, right?
correct. Memory card's still optional for the
That's
1200
good.
G2.
Yeah, especially for machine builders. Yep.
And so this is kind of a summary of some of the things we just talked about. We've got the inputs, the IOs basically it sits about the same. We've got eight inputs, 6 outputs for the 1212 model. For the 1214, you've got 14 in and 10 outs. The outputs are same structures before. You can do discrete transistor or relays. A nice change here is that both models offer 2 integrated Profinet ports or Ethernet ports. Before, you could only get 2 ports on the 1215 model or higher. So they both kind of get a buff there. We've also expanded the amount of, like I talked about, amount of modules, let's say, on the backplane bus that you can expand. With the 1214, we've introduced a second expansion slot on the front. So now you can have up to 2 signal boards or communication boards. The motion control is increased, added. We've added NFCs available for both modules, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the memory card is still optional with the 1200 G2.
Now, I'm wondering about the standard only comment there on the AC models. I'm assuming that means the relays you can't do high speed outputs with the relays. Not that you would ever want to, but is that what that means? Standard only?
No, it means the failsafe. You won't be able to do the AC power. And that's
Oh, so
today.
the AC power is standard only, no failsafe. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So that's a good question. So with the 1200s today, it's the same thing where you can only get the DC, DC, DC or DC, DC relay. The first column being the power source to
Line
the
power.
PLC. Yep. The second column being your inputs, what type of signal it is, your digital inputs, and then the third column being digital outputs.
The outputs, yeah.
Yeah. So for the failsafe, even today, it's the same thing where the 120 volt AC or 240 volt AC, depending, I guess, on your region or whatever. Inputs are only available for the non-safety versions, or what they have here called standard versions. So signal boards. So yeah, you pointed out that there's terminals on the top. These terminals are not removable. They're soldered into the board. So, but they're all push-in terminals. With the signal boards today, they're all screw-in terminals. They're still soldered to the boards with the 1200 G1, but they're all screw-in terminals. With the G2, we had to do push-in in order to kind of get the space requirement that we're looking for. The quantity structures, the amount of I/O for the signal boards have basically doubled. So with the signal boards that we had before, like the combo ones, I know for the 1200 Gen 1, we had like 2 and 2. Now it's 4 and 4, 4 in, 4 out. Same thing with the analog inputs and analog outputs, 4 inputs, 4 outputs, or 2 in or 2 and 2 outs. And then same thing with thermocouples. The signal modules, you have 16 channels basically, or if you wanted to do a combo, 8 in and 8 out. So this is a little bit reduced because with the 1200 Gen 1, there's a 16 in, 16 out combo module, but I know that there's still plans to potentially roll out higher density I/O modules for the 1200 later down the roadmap. But for now, these are just what's planned for the initial release. Basically, your standard I/O as well as your high-speed I/O. For safety, we've had safety modules before with the 1200 Gen 1. The amount of built-in I/O has reduced, and this is really not just because of the space, but really it kind of made the safety a little bit unattainable from a price perspective, where if you had only one e-stop, you're not going to buy a 16-channel fail-safe input card, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, most people would go with like a safety relay and kind of do the cost justification that way, or they'll use a Profinet based e-stop and use a safety CPU and call it a day. Which, not to knock any of those solutions, they all have their benefits in their own right. But again, it kind of made it a little bit unattainable. So they reduced the density of the safety I/O cards by about half. But they also introduced these signal boards, which we didn't have safety signal boards that plug into the front of the CPU. And this makes it a lot more obtainable for a safety system, right? Especially if you do have only like one e-stop, then and you're doing like a 1 out of 2 type thing, you can wire it directly in here. If you got the 1214 FC, then you add this safe output, and you're triggering one safe torque off or anything like that. You have that flexibility where I don't need to buy an 8-channel input and a 4-channel output if I'm only dealing with 1 or 2 signals each.
I think this is very interesting too, because we're looking at it, one module you can set up as 1 out of 1. So you have one signal coming in from maybe one sensor, and it goes to one input. Or if you need to have dual sensors in the field, you can do 1 out of 2, and you only get 4 inputs, but that's like you have 2 redundant sensors coming into 2 redundant inputs. So that's good, because a lot of times you really want the safety PLC to be checking its own program and electronics, and not so much having double IO everywhere, but sometimes you have to have it. And then the 8Vs, I thought that was very interesting, that allows it to detect short circuit and overload scenarios.
Yep.
So there's even, so for every input,
like your pulse check.
Yeah. So that's very cool.
Yep. Yeah. So basically, you get a pulse check for every channel, but and this is important because a lot of people don't realize when you buy a safety IO card and they specify how many channels they are, those numbers are typically, and I'm just speaking general, I'm not talking, specifically for the G2 right now, but in general, those numbers are the 1 out of 1 scenario, right? And so if you've got a dual channel e-stop, you're actually using 2 channels, you're not using 1. And so you kind of ask the question exactly like you just brought up, is this dual channel, or is this value, is this single channel or dual channel? And so I think we purposely designed these slides to indicate, hey, if you're doing single channel safety signals, you've got 4 available. If you're doing 2 channel, 2 channel e-stop button or light curtains or whatever interlocks, then you've got basically half the IO on the module. All right, some design changes. So I said the memory card is optional. There's actually a slider now with the CPU. You push the slider up, and then you can push the memory card in. It's kind of it's spring loaded, and then you push it down. It locks the memory card in, so it doesn't really it can't pop out. It's kind of locked in there. There's another big obvious thing is the 2 Profinet ports on every model, it's including the 1212. On the IO cards, it's kind of hard to tell on here, but if you flip down these the covers, you'll see these little indents here, right next to my pointer, and those indents on the front are actually pre-wiring positions. Because if you got all this mounted on a DIN rail, and then you've got your wire trays above and below, and all the infeeds into the IO card are coming from the top and the bottom, how are you supposed to know whether you're plugging your wires in as a panel builder into the right terminal, right pins?
Oh.
So what they did is they have these little notches on the front, and there's labels. And so you take the terminal block, you plug it into this notch, and there's the labels, and then you plug your wires in according to, whatever terminal they go into. It's a pre-wiring position. There's no power or anything to it. It's just, a plastic cutout. And then once you're done wiring it, you take it out of that pre-wiring position, and then you just push the terminal block with the wires in there into the terminal on the IO module. Kind of a nice, really cool feature, that something that you don't think about, but it goes a long way, especially when you're building panels and wiring things up, right? To have that convenience factor.
And if you're in front of it, or you're looking down over the panel, it's going to be much easier to wire through the front of the unit.
Oh yeah.
And then just when you're done, stick it on the top than it is to try to I mean, especially if it's already installed, it's how you're going to see back there. So no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Now the ones that are on the main unit are forward facing. They're deep. They're down into the unit about looks like an inch or so, to make room for any plugins you might add. But these expansion modules, the terminal blocks go in the top and the bottom. So the pre-wiring position is awesome. So you can wire from the front of it. Yeah, I could see trying to wire down on the top, and that'd be frustrating.
Yep. And you'll notice too is so they're all push-in terminals, right? There's these little tabs on the side of the connectors. So they basically this allows you to remove the terminal blocks without a tool. Now, granted, it's a lot easier with a tool, with a little tiny screwdriver. But these little tabs, you just kind of pull them off, and then you unlock them, and then it kind of pushes the terminal block off of its terminal base,
Yep.
and then you can kind of pull it out. You can pull it out very easily, and that's even on the I/O modules on the CPU itself. You can kind of it's hard to see in the picture, but you can kind of see it there. These little tabs on the side, that's something that makes it easier to add and remove the I/O modules. And then you'll notice that there's also color coding. Why are some terminals orange and why are some a gray? That's to indicate AC or relay channels. So like in this case, I can clearly tell that this is an AC DC relay module because your power source has orange terminal blocks, which tells me this is a 820 volt or 230 volt AC unit. My digital inputs are like a light gray, so that's a 24 volt DC channel. And then my relay outputs, which could be 120 volt AC, it could be 24. It's kind of variable, but they also put the orange to indicate that this is, that let's say higher voltage AC. So
that's nice.
Yep. So it keeps you from plugging the wrong terminals in the wrong bases. Same thing applies with the I/O modules. If you've got like an analog card or you've got a discrete card or a relay module, so you're not plugging the relay terminals into and they're all keyed too, so you can't plug the wrong ones in anyways. But
good.
But keeps you from miswiring it and wasting time and getting confused and all that. So.
Do you know if the terminal blocks are keyed at the factory or if they're like self-keying, kind of like the 1500, where you put the wiring on them and then it gets its key?
They're keyed at that right out of they're manufactured that way. They're right out of the factory. Yep. All right. We talked about the space. The CPU is a little bit deeper than the 1200 today. The 1200 G1, let's say today, and a little bit taller. But honestly, we find that it's not really a huge concern from the depth perspective, especially because, a lot of control panels, people tend to build, have a little bit larger. And in some scenarios, it might be an issue, like if you're doing like an AGV or something. But in most cases,
in most cases, the DIN rail space is going to be the big premium.
Exactly.
Not the depth, because you're under 6 inches, so.
Yeah,
pretty much fit in any cabinet.
If I can save, an inch and put some circuit breakers on that top DIN rail, then I'm saving, get a smaller enclosure altogether. Then that's a big money saver. Memory card's the same. Same thing as far as the memory card before. You can store your program on there. You can store some data, recipes, user files. Nothing's changing there. I do want to point out, as usual with the Siemens memory cards, they do have a longer read-write cycles than like your standard, let's say, SanDisk SD card. We get this question quite a lot. Can I just use that SanDisk memory card I got at Best Buy? And we're like, yeah, technically you can. It'll probably run fine for about a week. And then after that, you'll lose your program or your data or whatever you got on there. So
it depends on what you're using it for. And
you're right. In a pinch, it's okay, but you got to make sure you remember to follow up.
Absolutely.
These are the motion technology objects we talked about that are supported. A lot more than the 1200 today. The 1200 today really are just the speed axis and positioning axis. All the rest are usually functions you would find in a 1500 T technology CPUs. So now we can address a lot more complex applications with the 1200 G2. NFC stands for near field communication. It's a type of passive wireless communication, not like unlike Wi-Fi or Bluetooth where you need power. It's something, even our like credit cards have NFC chips in them. That's how we were able to do the wireless pay and things like that. This was a nice little addition to the CPU, just something for people to, and there's an app that goes with it, a Somatic NFC app that will come out with the CPU. But the goal really is just to use this for some simple data data handling and even some simple configuration settings. Here's basically a decision tree of what you can do, and the first question that comes up that I think is going to come up a lot is this secure? Wireless in my factory? No way. And I want to clarify, the key word in NFC is near, right? You have to basically, in order for NFC to work, you basically have to be touching the device. And from a security perspective, you can't access NFC with outside the cabinet, number one. So from a safety side, most likely you'll probably have the power off, depending on the voltages and I don't know, whatever your policies are, lockout, tag out, and things like that. Number two, if it's a security situation, again, you have to be physically up front, up close to the PLC. If I had a PLC that did not have NFC, would it be more secure if a adversary were to get to the point where they could touch my PLC? I don't think it's any more secure. I mean, if I'm in front of a PLC and I'm able to put it in stop or remove the power from that PLC or plug directly into the Ethernet port and download to it, I've already lost.
Yeah.
You've got bigger security problems than the NFC chip inside the PLC. So, but besides that, NFC can also be disabled. So it can't be used by default. It's actually disabled. So when you first get it out of the box, it's not used. At least all these other functions that are readable. Sorry. It's not out of the box. It can be used, but it's disabled by default when you configure it in your project. So the first time you download to it, if you don't intentionally change that setting, you disable it. But when it is out of the box, the only thing you can read from NFC is at that point the model number and the part number. MLFB stands for, I don't know, it's a German acronym for part number. Which again, if it's powered off and I'm reading that from outside the box, I can just read the label and get that same information. Exactly. So it's not really any more or less secure than reading the label. It's more of a convenience thing, right? So I can read this information. Maybe I want to take inventory of what my install base is and what the serial numbers and what firmware is running on there or what the status is of it. Get the diagnostic information of the PLC off of the PLC. If you remember, the S7-1200 has a display built in. 1200 G2 does not. Well, you can consider this app as kind of the built-in display where you can get a lot of that same information that you would get on a 1500 display. It's a kind of nice feature there.
Can't wait to play with it.
Yep. All right. Now getting towards the end. So when it comes to migration, if you're using like a 1212 or 1211, we talked about, hey, you have plenty of I/O built in. You've got an extra Ethernet port, and you have more expansion modules. You should be good to go. Performance-wise, it's about twice the speed as the 1211, 1212. The one thing that might be something to consider is if you're using those analog inputs that were integrated into the 1200s before, we no longer have integrated analog inputs. So the recommendation is use a signal board to meet that requirement.
So you get twice the speed, you get more memory, but you get more high-speed counters too.
Mm-hmm.
But you do lose the built-in analog.
Yeah, which, to be honest, was a little bit limiting before because it was only 0 to 10 volts.
Yeah.
So now you actually have that flexibility with the signal board where, even if you weren't using those analog inputs because of those limitations, you're kind of paying for something you don't need, right?
Exactly. Most people don't use them, so it's you're paying for something
Right.
you're not using. Yeah.
So now I can actually add some analog inputs that I need that are,
Hmm.
are the ones that I need, whether it's 4 to 20 milliamps, 0 to 20, or
Hmm.
plus minus 10, 0 to 10, whatever, or even thermocouple, all that.
Do you know if the resolution is any better? I think the built-in ones are typically low resolution, like 12-bit or so. I don't remember
Yeah, the
exactly.
signal boards, the signal boards are about the same as the ones built in. So
Okay.
yeah, it's
Okay.
about, I think, 12-bit for the Gen 1s. Um,
Okay.
and then the signal modules, the I/O cards, are going to have higher resolution. And then of course, the remote I/O, the AT200SP, are also going to have a lot more resolution. From a 1214 and 1215 and 1217 migration, it's a lot of the similar stories. The IOs built into 1214 to 1217 were the same, 14 in, 10 outs. So going into a 1214 G2 is ideal. From a memory card, I'm sorry, from a Profinet Ethernet port interface standpoint, the 1214 only had one port. It was only the 1215 and 1217s that had two. Well, the 1214 has two ports, so you should be able to migrate from any one of these models into a 1214C G2. Again, the performance is nearly doubled, and then the memory has also basically doubled from the previous generation. So you should be able to fit your programs into into a 1214 G2 easily. Same consideration as before when it comes to integrated analogs. You have to use the option board. The high-speed counters increase, the width has decreased. So just between the 1212 and the 1214C, you should be able to migrate the full family of the 1200 Gen 1 between those two models. So we make it a little bit easier from a selection standpoint. Another update that's coming when this releases is from the engineering side. If you wanted to do engineering of a safety CPU, you needed Step 7 Basic, and then you also needed the Safety Basic license, or Safety Advanced also works, and Step 7 Professional if you wanted to do the 1500s as well, and 300s and 400s. But you need at least a minimum basic, right? With Step 7 version 20, we're getting rid of the Safety Basic, and basically, essentially, you're getting the Safety Basic with the Step 7 Basic license. So you should be able to configure standard and fail-safe 1200 G2s with just a Step 7 Basic license,
Now,
starting in TIA Portal version 20.
that doesn't eliminate the need if you had an old Gen 1. If I have an old Gen 1, let's say V19, I'm still going to need that old safety basic license. This new free license is only for V20 and above and only for the G2?
No, it also will work for the 1200 Gen 1
Really?
safety. Yep.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So there will not even be a part number for Safety Basic V20.
Got it.
So again, it makes it a little bit easier from the selection standpoint. Only one part number you need for standard or safety 1200s from the engineering side. So reduction of the license cost helps easier with the integration. It's less license keys you need to maintain and manage. And again, all those safety functions and logic, you should be able to scale into the 1500 easily. This is basically the same thing. So Step 7 Basic, one engineering package for standard and failsafe. Same thing with ET200 IO. So if you want to add IO to it, remote IO, safety or standard, you should be able to configure that with the Step 7 Basic license. Roadmap. So basically, we're early May now. Hanover Fair just wrapped up. We got Automate coming up. This is basically the announcement phase where we've announced the product, get people excited, give some initial impressions and information on it. Towards the end of this calendar year, TI Portal version 20 will release. in which case we'll release firmware version 4.7 for the 1200, let's say current generation or first generation G1. Basically, those will have some security features added to it, like user management and access controls, user-specific management and access controls in the PLC, event logging, security event logging, and along with that, we'll have the initial release of the 1200 G2 PLC, and you'll be able to simulate it in PLC Sim. Shortly after that, beginning of calendar year 2025, we'll release the failsafe version of the G2, along with the failsafe I/O that goes with it. And then throughout the rest of the calendar year, we'll add some additional items to the portfolio release, like the RTD and thermocouple signal boards, I/O boards that plug in option boards, as well as the safety signal boards and some communication cards. And then, as the end of the calendar year 2025, then we'll roll out some more features into the G2, like OPC UA, higher density I/O that we talked about, some additional functionality in the safety I/O, some additional communication functions, and so on. So kind of a little bit of a scaled release with the G2. I do want to say that the 1200 Gen 1 is not going anywhere. It's not going to be phased out at any point. As you can see, like I said, in version 20, we're releasing a new firmware for the Gen 1 with some new features. The G2 in its initial release will not have all the functionality of the Gen 1, right? Like I mentioned, OPC UA is coming at the end of calendar year 2025. That's currently available in the 1200 G1. So, there's some things to look forward to with the G2 as it starts to roll out towards its throughout its early life cycle.
Yeah, if you're starting a new project, you may want to, start with the G2, at the end of the year, 2025. But if you're mass producing machines, you may want to take your time and stay with the G1 and sit down with your local Siemens folks and really understand what it has, what it doesn't have, to make sure before you migrate that it's going to work in your application version 1. But go ahead, back to you, Luis.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, and this is why we're really talking about this today, right? Is we want to have those conversations with you, with your audience, to really identify, from a timing perspective, from a functionality perspective, is the G2 the right fit? Is the Gen 1 the right fit? Is it a 1500? Is it 1500T? We're happy to have those discussions and really help, figure out a roadmap and a plan for you. And that being said, I mentioned the 1200 Gen 1 is not going away. I mentioned, we're still going to be doing some improvements on the Gen 1 for the time being. And how do you get started today? If you wanted to get started with Siemens, with the 1200 G2 or the 1500, and we've had this out we've had these starter kits away for quite a while, especially because of COVID and all the supply chain situation over the last couple of years. And for a limited time, we brought them back. It's in the US. I have the details here. And for your listeners who can't see the screens, we basically have two packages. The first package, you get an S7-1200 PLC, a 1212C AC DC relay. You remember I mentioned that earlier. The first AC is the power supply, DC is the digital input, RLY relay is the digital outputs. You also get a 4-inch unified basic panel HMI, which these just released maybe a year ago. So these are, if you haven't had a chance to play around with them, they're awesome. They're amazing. Offers a lot of advanced features you would expect from a modern HMI in a very price conscious form. And then you get the full license, Step 7 version 19 basic, to be able to do the engineering for both the PLC and the HMI. And the price of this kit is $705 US. And it's only going on until the end of June. So June 30th is the last day to purchase this starter kit at that price. And definitely gonna definitely selling like hotcakes right now. So, you know, you don't want to miss the opportunity to take advantage of that. And we're only limiting this, unfortunately, to our U.S. based users, and it's limited to two sets per customer. Um, but yeah, on top of this kit, on top of this package, we have basically the same package. The only thing that changes is a 7-inch. We're also including a 7-inch unified basic panel. So you still get the 1212 CPU AC/DC relay. You still get the Step 7 version 19 basic. But now on the second package, you get a 7-inch unified basic panel HMI. The price for this kit is $965. Again, same thing. US customers only, limit 2 per customer, and it expires at the end of June 30th, 2024. This price goes away. So plenty of options to get started today. Start playing around with TI Portal, start playing around with Siemens, get the questions asked, get familiar with TI Portal, get familiar with the S7-1200, and then when you're ready, you can scale up to the S7-1500 or scale up to the S7-1200 G2, or even scale up your HMI applications from a unified basic panel to, say, a unified comfort panel, which I know, Shawn, you have tons of material already built up on this, and you did a recent unboxing video on these too. So for your audience, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, Shawn does an amazing job on creating these types of content.
Yeah, and could you back up one side, Lewis? I'd appreciate that. So what I want to say to the audience is, you know, you're getting an S7-1200, you're getting a 1212, okay? So you get some IO there, right? It's not the smallest of the small. You're getting a brand. This is not one of these legacy basic panels, right? Which worked, they worked, but you're getting the next gen, right? Basic
Yeah.
panel, which is just beautiful and it's modern, multi-touch. It's just that's why MTP stands for multi-touch. Even though it's only 4 inches, that's great enough to learn on. These things are beautiful. You really struggle too to tell the difference between the unified comfort and the unified basic from the front of the unit. But you're also getting in the $700 price tag, you're getting a lifetime copy of the software, right? Other vendors charge just $300 just to leave it for a year. Okay. So you're
Mm-hmm.
getting the PLC, you're getting a lifetime copy of the software, you're getting an HMI. It's not an older HMI, it's the one that came out in the last 12 months. And I know my students, because I teach the S7-12, I teach the S7, and I'm actually working on my unified panel course right now, and my students are constantly telling me that they're really bummed out that they can't get the old starter kits anymore. So, the first thing I'm going to do after we get out of this is make new lessons for all my students so they know about this deal. The only bad thing about this deal is it ends June 30th. But
Yep.
yeah, you can download a copy of the software and try it for 21 days, and we show you how to do that in the course. And you can use PLC Sim for 21 days to simulate your PLC. But I don't care what vendor is selling you a PLC HMI and a lifetime copy of the software. This is a great price. So, and I've trust me, I've bought several of these starter kits over the years. So I just want to say it's great to see that these are back. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you wait a couple years, maybe they'll do a G2 version. But if you want to learn this year, 2024, definitely check these out. I'm going to say the part number here for anybody who's driving down the road and they're like, well, what's the part number? It's
Mm-hmm.
US2. And now this may be called an article number or what, but you know what
Yep.
I mean, the product identification number.
This is
US2
what you're going to tell your Siemens
distributor.
distributor
Yes.
when you want to get a quote or when you want to buy one of these. This is the part number
This
that
is
you
what
would
you want
give
to
them.
tell them.
Yep.
So it's US2 as in United States 2, right? And then it's MTP 400 for multi-touch panel 4-inch, MTP 400. Then it's dash 1212 dash SK for starter kit. US2 MTP 400 dash 1212 dash SK. And of course, if you're watching, you're like, Shawn, stop reading it. But if you're driving down the road, I know a lot of people listen. That's only good through June 30th. There is of course, we have the larger one on the next slide. If you want to get the bigger panel for 265 or $260 more, and then we also had on the morning show we have, if you're doing the 1500s, there's a new software bundle. that
Yep.
saves you 40% on the 1500. So watch the morning show or the Automation News Roundup. I put it in both to get those part numbers, and we'll put this in. If you're involved in my courses, we'll add this content really soon, so you have access to that. And Louis, thank you for letting me interject there. I'll turn it back to you now.
Yeah, no, I mean, perfect. And again, for the audience that's listening in, the second package with the 7-inch HMI, it's basically the same part number, US2 colon MTP 700 for the 7-inch panel dash 1212 dash SK.
Perfect.
So you got two part numbers there, one for 4-inch HMI and one for 7-inch HMI. So, um, that was pretty much it. That's the wrap up here for now. I do have again, this is going to be highlighted at the Automate show as well. So we'll have some pretty good conversations with people in person and be able to showcase some of these features in person at that show as well.
Yeah, and just for the audience, the reason we're not releasing this for the show is we had somebody come in and sponsor that spot already. We will make it available to our members right away, but it will go general public the week after Automate show, just because this is just all new, right? So
Yep.
Louis and I just a couple days ago, it's like, let's get together. So we're doing this as fast as we can. So, but in any case, Louis, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show and straightening me out, because I did make some mistakes in my assumptions in my live show. So I appreciate that. I wish I was going to Automate, but there's too much work back here to be able to take a $2,000-3,000 vacation to the automation show. But in
No
any
worries.
case, I know the vendors really just want to talk to customers anyway. They don't want to talk to the press. But I hope you have a safe trip, and thank you again for coming on the show and bringing us up to speed.
No problem. Thanks again for having me.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I want to thank Louis for coming on the show and bringing us up to speed on the brand new S7-1200 G2, which was announced in Hanover and is coming later this year. I really appreciate that. And I'm excited about these new starter packs too. As soon as I'm done this show, I'm going to go over and add a new lesson at theautomationschool.com featuring those for our students. Now, if you are a member, you got access to this a week and a half early. Thank you for joining our membership program on either YouTube or Locals or theautomationblog.com. Really appreciate you guys. Not only do you get access to this early, we have a V36 episode that was for members only, and you're getting the Automation Morning Show, the full edition, as part of your membership as well. So thank you to all our members, and thank you to all our listeners as well. I still appreciate you guys, and I want to wish you all an awesome week. Remember to stay courageous and stay fearless. And until next time, my friends, peace.